Now, let me give you one guess as to what we're preaching out of today. Genesis. Wow. What a surprise. Okay, I'll tell you why we're preaching out of Genesis. As soon as it goes, there we go. Because Genesis is the beginning. It is the beginning of us. Genesis lays out the big story of the world. Who God is, who we are, why we're here. Good question. The problem of humanity. Yes, humanity does have some problems. And God's solution for the problem of humanity. In Genesis, we find our true identity as human beings, who God created us to be, and why it is that we live in community. So we are in Genesis 31 and 32 this week. I decided to call this week's sermon Jacob's Journey because going back and reviewing everything that we've gone through, this sort of feels like a mini series that should be on TV because there is so much drama. Just there's violence and there's lying and there's cheating and just all sorts of bad behavior. And so I decided to call this Jacob's Journey, the continuing saga. And so this week, as we're about to approach 2 new chapters, I want to look back at what we've covered so far briefly in Jacob's journey. Jacob tricks his brother Esau out of his birthright. Jacob was the younger brother, Esau's the older brother. Esau's supposed to have the birthright. Jacob tricks him out of it for a bowl of stew. Jacob's mother wants Jacob blessed instead of Esau. Jacob should not be the one that receives the blessing because he is the younger brother. But when he was born, the Lord told his mother he will rule over his older brother. Jacob steals the blessing of his father. Esau is furious and vows to kill his brother, so Jacob flees. Jacob is off to find a wife, and he falls for Rachel, love at first sight. Jacob works for Rachel's father, Laban, for 7 years in order to earn the right to marry Rachel. Laban tricks Jacob the night of their wedding into marrying Leah, the older sister that he did not want to marry. Jacob agrees to work for 7 more years so that he can marry Rachel as well. Jacob does not treat Leah well. As Glenn said last week, the marriage is a very dysfunctional love triangle as Leah competes with Rachel for Jacob's love, which she doesn't have. And Rachel is jealous of Leah's ability to have babies, which in the beginning she doesn't have. The wives compete to produce for the most babies. Jacob accumulates wealth working for Laban. Okay, chapter 31, verse 1. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. They don't care about their father. They're worried about their inheritance. Verse 2, and Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Apparently, when Jacob was working for Laban for free in order to earn his wives, Laban was happy. Now, not so much. Verse 3, then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were, a sort of clandestine meeting away from Laban. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. God had said to him, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Okay, now I'm just wondering if he would have been as eager to go back to his father's land if things had not turned around. Because prior, he was building up wealth, he had 2 wives, he had grandkids, it was all going pretty good. And then all of a sudden things started going sideways, and the sons were complaining, and Laban wasn't treating him well. And it just makes me wonder if maybe God allowed this so that he would be uncomfortable, so that when God said, okay, now it's time for you to go back to your father, he was like, yep, sure, I'd be glad to go. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Whatever. Why did she steal his gods? Was it because she had a special affinity for them? Was nostalgic? Was it because they were expensive? Was she just mad at her father? But for whatever reason, she stole his household gods. On the 3rd day after Jacob had gone, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now, Laban did not say anything. But the point of this is that God's warning was strong enough that he didn't go in guns a-blazing. He did not attack. He didn't go in with the intention of hurting or killing Jacob and his people. When they met up, Laban says, now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. Okay, I understand that, but why did you steal my gods? Now, Jacob's response was, I don't know what you're talking about. So he gave Laban permission to check all the tents and to check all the people. And he said, if you find anyone that stole anything of yours that is not rightfully mine, you can kill him. He doesn't know that it was his own wife. Fortunately, they don't find the gods. She's able to hide them. But this does give us a little bit of insight into Rachel's character, because we're not really sure why she stole them, but it wasn't a nice thing to do. So the 2 of them meet up, and Jacob's able to express his issues with Laban. You didn't treat me fairly. You tricked me in the beginning. You made me work twice as long as I should have. You made me marry the daughter I didn't want. And now your sons are complaining and treating me badly. And then Laban says, yeah, well, I think I treated you fine, and you just ran off in the middle of the night without even telling me and took my daughters and my grandchildren and all of these possessions. So the 2 of them are not in agreement, but they do finally come together. And in verse 44, Laban says, come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. Verse 49, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. So Laban is showing that he does actually care about his daughter's welfare. And he's reminding Jacob. Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them, and then he left and returned home. Let me just put in a side note here. Okay, everybody's misbehaved. Nevertheless, God is working things out for good. We are the same. We misbehave, but God has a plan and he works things out for our good. But that doesn't mean that when we sin, there are not consequences. In this case, it looks like the consequence is Laban will probably never see his daughters and grandkids again because they've set up this line of demarcation. We don't want to confuse the consequences of our bad actions with God not forgiving us. God is more than willing to forgive them for their bad choices, but that doesn't mean they don't have to live with the consequences. So we've seen all this bad behavior in our little mini-series, and it's basically all because of their own bad choices that these difficult things are happening. I mean, Jacob tricked his brother out of his birthright, right? Well, that shows us that Jacob is kind of an unkind person. He's treating his brother really badly. And as far as his brother goes, I'd just say he's foolish. Because the situation was that he was so hungry that he traded his birthright for some stew. Not brilliant. Jacob's mother wants Jacob blessed instead of Esau. So the logical thing would be that she would communicate with her husband and she would go to him and she would say, hey, remember, when Jacob and Esau were born, God told us that Jacob was going to rule over Esau. So we need to rethink this. I think the blessing is supposed to go to Jacob. But she didn't do that. She planned this elaborate trickery so that he would get the blessing. Jacob steals the blessing of his father. So he was deceitful, he was selfish, and obviously very unloving towards both his father, who he lied to, and his brother, who he tricked. Esau is furious and vows to kill his brother Jacob. I would say he's a little out of control, has a little anger issue going on. Jacob flees. Now, the parents are in agree with this. Yes, I think you better get out of town. And by the way, why don't you go find yourself a wife? Again, how really dysfunctional is this that the parents didn't bring the family together and say, Esau, you're not supposed to kill your brother. Jacob, you should probably apologize. Let's try to work this out. No, the answer is, nope, he better go. Jacob falls for Rachel. First time he sees her, she's gorgeous. He wants her for his wife. Other than the fact that she's a relative, he doesn't know anything about her. He doesn't know anything about her character. He doesn't know how she's thought of by other people. And yet, he chooses her because she's beautiful. So I'm just wondering how much wisdom is involved. Now, maybe God spoke to him and said, yep, that's the one. But she ends up showing us that she does not have sterling character. Jacob works for Laban for 7 years to earn Rachel, and Laban tricks Jacob into marrying Leah. We should feel sorry for him, but I don't, because it's rather ironic that Laban did to him what he did to his brother and his father. Jacob agrees to work for 7 more years so that he can marry Rachel, but once Jacob marries Leah, he does not treat her well. And the fact is, it suggests that he was pretty thoughtless. He was pretty cruel. I mean, she was pushed on him by her father. He didn't want her. Apparently, nobody else wanted her because her dad had not been able to marry her off. They could have come together, and again, Laban could have said, look, I know you want my daughter Rachel, but in our culture, the oldest daughter has to get married first, so I need for you to marry her as well. No, he just tricked him. As Glenn said last week, the marriage is very dysfunctional. It's a love triangle, and as Leah competes with Rachel for Jacob's love, which she doesn't have, Rachel is jealous of Leah's ability to have babies, which she hasn't had, and everyone in this story at this point is behaving poorly. The wives compete to produce the most babies. And again, as Glenn said, this is dysfunctional and toxic. Jacob accumulates wealth working for Laban. You know what? In spite of Jacob's behavior, God blesses him anyway. This tells us something about God. He will do what he will do, knowing that we're going to mess up. The brothers are resentful. That's just because they're greedy. Now, look at these traits: the deceit, the lying, the selfishness, the lack of self-control, the lack of wisdom, the petty jealousy, the greed, the unkindness. Are you familiar with any of these? We see them all around us all the time. And yet, God is in control. In spite of all this bad behavior on their parts, God is moving his plan forward. And the same can be said for us. Do you ever find yourself looking back at something you said or did that you know you shouldn't have and that you're ashamed of, or you just wish you'd done it differently, and you wonder if you just messed everything up? God is in control. He knows we're imperfect. He knows we sin. He knows we make mistakes. And he is going to move his plan forward anyway. The other thing we see is that God is gracious. He does not give us what we deserve. He gives us grace. Moving on to chapter 32, in verse 7, in great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. Now, this was a logical plan, right? He's figuring out how he's going to do this, because guess what? The last time he saw Esau, he said he was going to kill him. So he's a little nervous about going back home and facing Esau. But it also shows a little bit of a lack of faith. Even though God has said to him, I'm going with you, now's the time, he's still making a contingency plan. And we do the same thing, right? It's kind of like me coming to you and saying, I have a headache, I take the aspirin, and then I ask you to pray for me. It's like, well, we're just going to plan ahead. And again, God knows that that's the way our minds work. Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. This is true. I had only my staff when I crossed the Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. He decides to be totally honest with God. I'm scared. I know you've made promises to me. I know you've come through time after time, but I am scared. And God honors that. God likes that when we're honest. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. Is he reminding God of his promises? Yes. Does he need to remind God? No. He needs to remind himself. And that's something that we need to do. We need to somehow, in our own way, figure out how we can remind ourselves of all those times that God has come through for us, and God has answered prayer, and God has surprised us, and God has done miracles, so that when we're faced with these situations where we are scared, we can remember, oh yeah, God is in control, and God is gracious. And again, God will forgive us when we have our contingency plans just in case. Verse 17, he instructed the one in the lead. When my brother Esau meets you and asks, who do you belong to? And where are you going? And who owns all of these animals in front of you? Then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to you, my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. He also instructed the second and third and all of the others who followed the herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him. So Jacob is wisely choosing to be gracious to Esau. I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So he's getting everyone and everything out of the way of harm. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let go of me, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome. This is a big moment in this plan of God's that he's moving forward. He started with Abraham and Sarah, who were barren, and said, you will not only have a family, but you will create an entire nation from you. And that nation is Israel. And this is where Jacob gets his name, Israel. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask me my name? Like, you already know who I am. Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, which means face of God, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. So we've seen all this bad behavior throughout the story. And honestly, I look at this list and I see my own behavior. I can honestly say that I have indulged in every one of these at some point in my life. This is the human condition. This is who we are. And yet, God is in control. And you look around the world, you look around your community, you look at the political situation and the election coming up, you look at the wars, and you see chaos and uncertainty and violence and injustice and inequality and discrimination and hatred and hypocrisy and abuse. And yet, if we believe what we've read so far and what we will continue to read throughout the Bible, right up through Jesus and on, and what we've seen in our own lives, God is in control. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. As the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but I will accomplish what I desire. God is in control. He is going to do what he is going to do. And God is gracious. In spite of all of our bad behavior, our selfishness, I see selfishness in me. I see lack of faith in me. I've been deceitful. I've shown unforgiveness, unkindness, prejudice, cruelty, jealousy, greed, envy, the human condition. And yet God is so gracious to us, extending grace, unmerited favor. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose, in Romans 8:28. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness. Yep, I'm weak. I'm declaring it. I'm weak, so that Christ's power may rest on me. I'm imagining that there are people here today that are relating to some of the issues that have come through in the story today. Maybe you're feeling things around you are out of control. Well, the reason you feel that is because you are not in control. That's just a fact. But God is in control. The trick is to know that you know that you know that God is in control. And if you're looking back at some of the things that you've done and said that you're sorry for, that you're embarrassed about, just remember God is gracious. If you have confessed, God has forgiven you. If you are feeling like God hasn't forgiven you, it's not because he hasn't forgiven you. It's probably because you haven't forgiven yourself. Because God is gracious.